Let me introduce, therefore, Mr. Kresa. He's the Chairman Emeritus of Northrop Grumman Corporation. In fact, he was responsible for bringing those two great companies together. He was also responsible, he tells me this morning, for bringing 18 other companies under that banner. He was Chairman of the Board from September 1990 until October 2003. He served as the Chief Executive Officer from January 1990 until March 2003, and President from 1987 until September of 2001. Mr. Kresa served on the boards of a number of companies including Avery Dennison Corporation, Eclipse Aviation Corporation, Fluor Corporation, General Motors Corporation, and the Trust Company of the West, and was a senior advisor for the Carlyle Group. He presently serves on the board of Mankind Corporation and several non-profit organizations and universities. Mr. Kresa's prestigious awards of leadership include Forbes magazine's Company of the Year, recognized in 2002, Aviation Week's 2002 Laurel Citation for achievements in aeronautics and propulsion, California Institute of Technology's Management Association's Excellence in Management Award for demonstrating extraordinary vision and leadership, the Ellis Island Medal of Honor for significant contributions to our national heritage, the Howard Hughes Memorial Award for his contributions to the advancement of aviation and science and space technology, and his selection by Business Week magazine as one of the nation's top 25 managers for 2001. As a graduate of M.I.T, he received a BS in 1959, an MS in 1961, and an E.A.A. in 1966, all in Aeronautics and Astronautics, and is a member of the National Academy of Engineering and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. So it gives me particular pleasure to ask Kent to join us, and thank you very much for coming today and addressing us.
Is this on? Can you hear me? Yeah. Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to be here and see you. I'm now a resident, at least snowbird, for the good part of the year down here, and really enjoy it here in the desert. I'm about to go up to Vancouver, Washington, where I live during the summer, where it's also beautiful and it's a little cooler than it is down here during the summer. I have a couple of things I wanted to talk about today, and I'll also be happy to answer some questions. But one of the people asked me, thought that perhaps what I ought to talk about a little bit is how Northrop Grumman came to be, and what was really driving, what drove the whole industry to consolidate in the way that it did back in the 90s. And so I thought, well, I'll spend a little bit of time on that maybe and see where that goes. I heard that over a period of about a decade, Northrop became Northrop Grumman, and then we acquired another 18 major corporations and became the company that we are today. I should say they are today. I'm not with the company anymore. I've retired. Once I retired from the board, and I believe the best practices is you let the new guys do the stuff, and they did it, and I was no longer involved in the company, although I do help and consult a little bit on some programs when they need it. But let me just talk about the time. It was when the Berlin Wall came down, and there was a view that there would be a huge peace dividend that was going to be created. They were going to essentially cut the military budget in about half. It didn't go quite to half, but it went to about 60%. And the Secretary of Defense called in all of the CEOs of the corporations, and we all had a lovely dinner in the Pentagon, and it was called the Last Supper, and it was good reason it was called the Last Supper. It was because they essentially told us that the budgets were going to go down, that they were going to take about 50% of the industry offline, that there wouldn't be contracts for that many people. There were two ways to go about it. One is everybody just do their thing, compete like mad, and the government would choose whatever they're going to choose, and at the end of the day, half of the companies would be gone. The other idea would be for you, the industry, to come together and figure out what are the best strengths that could could be formed in terms of aligning the best capabilities of America and create new companies that would keep the best, and you would take the various things offline and do that in a normal way. And that was essentially the start of the whole thing. Every CEO went out of there wondering what it all meant to them and what they were going to do. There were only a few options, obviously. One of the options was to do nothing and either win or lose. There was some that said, well, let's sell out, let's see who would like to buy us, and we'll cash out, we'll turn what the company is back into cash and give it to the shareholders. There were others that decided that they wanted to be acquired. So there were all those players going on, and people took various positions in time, over time, that either were acquirers or eventually, after they acquired for a while, got to be a certain size, another company gobbled them up. And so it was a rather turbulent time. It turned out that we decided, we had the luxury of having just being in the final throes of finishing the B-2 bomber program, so we had a lot of cash coming into the company. And we also had a vision of what the world was going to be like at the turn of the century. And we thought, with the board's blessing, that we could acquire, we could become a net acquirer, bring in companies and put them together and make more value for our shareholders than we had if we just sold the company as we were at the time. And that was the strategy that went on. The first major acquisition that we did was Grumman. And I don't know if you recall that, but it was a hostile acquisition. It was the first one we did, and it was hostile. It was also successful. Turns out that hostile acquisitions turn very friendly at the end. It was, but they had decided, after we had talked about merging the two companies for about 6 months, they and their board decided it was a better idea to sell to Lockheed. And so there was a good announcement one day that as we're in the process of getting all our paperwork together, that they were going to be acquired by Lockheed, and that was it. And I said, no, I don't think that's a good idea. And I said, no, I'm not going to do it. We started a little war, and it all worked out for us. And so we then acquired Grumman, and everybody thought that it was an airplane company buying an airplane company, and that was not what we were doing. We viewed that the airplane side of Grumman was about over. They had not won any major things, but they had a lot of very interesting, exciting future things to do. They had a program called Joint Stars, which was a surveillance system for looking at the ground. And we said, hey, surveillance is going to be a big thing. This is really important. This is what we want. They also had a fledgling activity in information technology, and thought, boy, this is going to be the biggest thing since sliced bread. At the turn of the century, I thought that there would be a thing that has since become known as cyber war, and we ought to really get into that kind of a business. It's going to be important. And they also were very big in jamming. They had a very large jamming capability with their airplanes and also their systems. So that was what I really coveted about Grumman, and that's what we saved, and that was the start of it. And over time, we had a view of what was the right thing to do, where were the technologies going, what were the needs that we were going to see in the world that we saw at the turn of the century, and we acquired companies that would fit into that vision. And we look every year or so, are we on the right track? Are these things the right things? So this is really what's going to happen. And we got it pretty well right from the beginning, and wound up constantly acquiring the companies that made a difference, and the company grew very well. And by the time when I took over the company, we were about a $5 billion corporation, mostly in the airplane business, as you know, doing fighters, and we did the B-2 bomber. And by the time I retired, we were a $38 billion corporation, and we were in everything from space and building carriers and everything in between. So it worked, and it worked well, and the stockholders did very well. In that period, they doubled or more doubled their money, so they did well. And since I left, they've even done better, so there's another message there. So, They've continued to grow, and they're doing a great job. So it was a rather exciting and turbulent time. The world has changed. An interesting thing that happened at the turn of the century, I couldn't understand. Acquired all of these companies were in the information technology space, and I couldn't find, there was nothing going on in cyber war. There was nobody interested in it. It was not talked about. I said, how did I miss this? I think this is going to be the biggest thing. So as soon as I retired, it became the biggest thing. And it started growing at about 10% a year. It's still growing at 10% a year. It's the biggest piece of Northrop Grumman now. And it's huge. I just missed it. I missed it. It was just a very short period of time, but it's absolutely enormous. It's going to continue to be the biggest piece of our defense budget, and there seems to be no end in sight. It has to be done. So, turned out it was the right thing to do to acquire all those companies because we really were positioned properly to be a very major player in that business. So that worked out well. A lot different than the airplane business. You know, you start out as an airplane guy and you're in cyber war. It's a very different world. I want to we can talk about that if you want to hear more about that later, but I'd like to go on and just do two other little things. One is I thought I'd give those of you a little idea of the genesis of the stealth business and how that all came about. It turned out I was fortunate to have really lived through that whole period from the very beginning. Before I went to Northrop, I was in the Advanced Research Projects Agency called DARPA at the time. And we had a little program which we called Project Harvey. And it was called Project Harvey. It was the idea of hiding airplanes. Big things, hiding big things from radars. And it was called Project Harvey because there used to be a big rabbit named Harvey. And we went out and did solicitations for people, and 3 companies came forward to do that, McDonnell Douglas, Lockheed, and Northrop, with different ideas on how to do it. And it was, we did what was called pole testing at that time, meaning building models that we tested against certain radar frequencies to see how well they worked. And there were some very interesting things that happened. There were very different technologies that people were using at the time. And then I left the government and I went to Northrop. And in that period, after the first set of Project Harvey was done, the Air Force was sufficiently excited about it that they wanted to do a fighter. And they had a fighter competition. It was a totally classified program. It was, there were 2, they essentially got down to 2 people to build models. One was Lockheed, the other was Northrop. They were very different technologies. The Lockheed technology was using an idea of faceting the vehicle so that when radar energy would hit it, it would bounce off in a different direction. It was just like thinking of mirrors. It was essentially the equivalent of putting mirrors on an airplane and having the radar energy bounce off in a different direction. The Northrop technology was very different, and it was designed to essentially not allow the radar waves to be reflected back due to the way you manage the curvature of the aircraft and the way you killed the returns at the edges with certain kinds of radar absorbent material. The advantage of that technology was that you could build any airframe you wanted. You could have the aerodynamic shape that was right, as opposed to the facets, which were very, very difficult to make an airplane that would fly right. For the first competition, Lockheed won it. The view was that the Northrop technology was too exotic, too new. They really wanted to go and get one of these things, so they went with the Lockheed version, and of course the Lockheed fighter, which you all recall, was born, and they built a bunch of them. The problem is very, very unstable airplane. They could handle the instabilities with controls, but it was very, very hard to fly and very difficult because it turns out facets don't have good aerodynamics, so it's a tough airplane to fly. But it served its purpose. The other thing is, its radar cross-section was called a Pac-Man. You could lower the radar cross-section at the nose, but everything else bloomed like huge. And the idea of just having the energy just flow over the airfoil, just the way the wind does, which was sort of the design that Northrop had come up with, seemed very attractive. And so even though Northrop lost the contract for the fighter, ARPA continued with a special airplane, which was a surveillance aircraft, very classified, that would essentially give you 360 degrees of stealth, namely all the way around, and wherever you looked at it, you could keep it very low signature. And they tested it by saying, well, we'll also make this a stand-in surveillance aircraft, which with a huge radar in it. So this was, you know, it was essentially got the nickname of the whale because that's what it looked like. It really did look like a whale when it got done, but this thing couldn't be seen by radar because it was the way it was designed and the way the physics of keeping the electromagnetic waves to flow on the surface and then continuing on its way as if there was nothing there. That was very exciting and it worked very well. And so there was another program that came on right after that called the Bomber, which was a classified bomber that they had a bomber program which was out in the open, which everybody was bidding on, but they had another program underneath it, which was a black program, which became the B-2 bomber, and that's the one that Northrop won. And so you now know what that was, and that's the way stealth is done today. There are no more facet ideas. That was sort of earlier technology, and of course, since then there have been many newer aircraft that have come on that have the same capability and actually more capability. So great technology, and it was a great boon to the industry, and I think we did a great job. The wonderful thing about stealth is that it requires very precise machining, very precise handling of the surfaces. And at the time, America, even though the Russians spent, and if you've ever heard, has anybody watched The Americans lately or recently? You know, they keep on talking about the spies who are trying to get that information. I can assure you that they had it because there were 3 people that were caught, Russian spies stealing it. And we know of 3 that we caught, and we have no idea how many more actually got information, but they had a huge network trying to get the information. But the important thing was that even if they understood how to do it, they couldn't do it. They had none of the capability to do it because if you just have very small missteps in the way you align things, that would be just enough to trigger returns from the radar, so you could never get the capabilities. It's a very sophisticated technology, and the way it was done for the first time, it's very difficult to keep it maintained. So the earliest aircraft have all been modified with new technology, so you don't have to maintain it with the terrible ways that we had to do the first time. But anyway, technology moves forward, and it's been a great thing. And the B-2 bomber is still an unbelievable capability, and is always used. If we go in anger, we go with the B-2 bombers first because they're absolutely the best. I won't talk any more about stealth, but I can answer some questions on that. I'm going to talk about one more topic, which is kind of fun. I'm going to show a little video, and that is the evolution of unmanned aircraft. You know, they've been around forever. In fact, I was just talking to Herb, who used to, when I first went to Northrop, I went into they had a pilotless aircraft division where they built little drones for targets where people shot at them. So, you know, this was going on for 30, 40, 50 years. So there have been unmanned vehicles for a long time. But the thing that's happened is we now really have the capability to take the man out of the aircraft completely. There is no requirement for what all of you pilots did. Now, most pilots, and I can assure you the ones that are working today, do not like to hear this. Do not want to hear it. Do not want to believe that an unmanned system can do their job, but I can assure you they can do it substantially better because the sensors and the control systems that we can build today can operate much faster with much more capability than the human is able to do. And so there are all kinds of arguments, and I don't really want to go through it all other than to try to convince you that it's here, it's coming, and I don't know exactly when we'll switch over to a time when all of our aircraft will be unmanned, and we'll go to California, we'll go to New York in an unmanned aircraft, and all of our packages will arrive through FedEx through an unmanned system that will operate magically every night. But it will come, and it's on its way. And I give the speech a lot, and most people don't want to hear the talk because they believe somehow the macho-ness of flying and what they do and how important it is and what they did and what we people did in airplanes in the past is unbelievable. I'm just saying we now have a better, we can relieve the capability of doing that. So there's nothing negative about the past, but the future says that we're going to do it better this new way. And I give this sort of a little elevator speech to people. It's not completely correct, but it sort of gets the right message, and that is the following, that I say my grandfather would never go in an elevator that wasn't unmanned. And everybody laughs. He says, how cute that is, how quaint, how like that is. And I say, my father really had a hard time when he went to the airport to get in that train that was unmanned. And everyone thinks about it a little bit, well, they don't have any trouble when they go to the airport getting in those unmanned things and going between the airport with an unmanned train. I said, but I can assure you your grandchildren won't have any trouble being on an unmanned airplane. Everybody gets tense. The point is, it's only another dimension of movement, and we've already got past the first two. And I can assure you, by the time our grandchildren are here, or their grandchildren, once we get past the politics, which is very difficult because there are a lot of people that it's not in their interest to have unmanned aircraft, I can assure you. In fact, any pilot that used to fly for an airline will understand that. And there are a lot that are flying today that don't like to hear this. But this is where technology is going. And what I wanted to show you is a little clip of the XB-47, which is really sort of the state of the art of what we can do today, which is the unmanned carrier landings of the XB-47. And I might, and this was the Collie Trophy, this won the Collie Trophy this year, and there's a little movie that I want to show you on that. I also want to say that it was in the paper yesterday that they did the first unmanned refueling of that unmanned vehicle. So, hang on guys, it's really happening. Okay, let's show this.
What if we want to put unmanned aircraft on an aircraft carrier? How do we do that?
It's just the sequences of build during a couple of years. This is also a very stealthy airplane. River tests for getting ready. Interesting, all the guys on the deck still use their hands and talk to the
Just to see it move on the deck, you could see the excitement in the ship's crew that something new and something very exciting was about to happen. They were on the brink of a new era of Navy aviation. Smaller than we are. When it plants itself on the runway, it plants itself on the runway and stays there. You see one puff of smoke off of each tire, and that's it. It's steady as a rock. It lands in the same place every time. And it will do it repeatedly because it doesn't know any other way to do it. Unmanned aircraft will not totally negate the need for manned aircraft and pilots, but it will alleviate the need to put out pilots in imminent danger on first strike.
A little touch and go there.
Going on 32 years, and I will say this is probably the most exciting program I've ever worked on.
The pride that they felt as being the first ones to do something that nobody had ever done before. You could see it on their faces.
The reaction was pretty phenomenal. They all were very impressed. They all were very surprised. People were super excited. I've never seen so many people line up just to see an aircraft refuel.
What we accomplished, and it's just an incredible system. Great experience.
When I get older and I have my grandkids sitting on my lap, so I can tell them that I was there and that I truly experienced it. And it's just something that I'm just personally proud of.
You know, my first program is so important, and you know, everybody always talks about, yes, we're making history, but I see it more as we're shaping the future of naval aviation.
Let's forge ahead. If we need unmanned, persistent survivable aircraft on the aircraft carrier, how do we do that? Is we take it, we build it, and we put it there so it's available when we're ready. It's not just unmanned aviation and strike weapons, but a portfolio of the enabling capabilities that brings this new generation of technology and capabilities to our warfighters to fight the fight and win, and more importantly, be able to keep the peace.
One of the things that is interesting on this is that they did a about 20 takeoffs and landings with this thing, and they hit the wire, the same wire at the same point 20 times, and they got very worried about it because they practically were damaging the wire. I mean, they never had a situation where they were hitting the same spot every time. And so they asked that they change every flight, we move it by a little bit different amount, another inch over on either side. And that's the way you got to do it, because as I said, the bandwidth of being able to handle the simple motions, they're not simple if you happen to be on a pitching deck, but the simple motions of that and the aerodynamics and so forth are really small compared to what capability you have on board to be able to handle that and control it aerodynamically, so you just don't miss these things. So, I mean, it really is a phenomenal capability, and it's just a great, how everything has grown and the technology is better. Okay, I'll stop now and see if anybody has any questions on any of the issues that, yeah.
That was all there. Who is flying the plane?
It's all automatic. There are two kinds of unmanned vehicles. One is sort of a simplified type, which is a pilot in a room somewhere a long way away, which essentially has control, has seeing things. This aircraft and most of the surveillance aircraft just fly themselves. You tell them what you want to do, where you want them to go. Either you give them waypoints or you give them land or take off or some characteristic. You also have a mode where you can switch over so a person can deal with it if you need to. Particularly in manned airspace, you have to have an ability for a pilot to be able to deal with it, because in manned airspace, they don't allow unmanned aircraft. They want to have a pilot involved. So there is actually somebody who takes over and is controlling if the controllers tell them to go to another altitude or do something different, they do that with the airplane, with a person in the loop. But the airplanes themselves do not need any of that. I mean, they fly themselves. If they get in trouble, they'll land themselves, they'll find a location to land, and then do what they have to do
So on a surveillance aircraft, that thing can go out and do the surveillance, and it's all pre-programmed.
Everything's pre-programmed. Yeah, you can tell it. Yes, the majority of them, Global Hawks, for example, which fly for about 36 hours you put them up there, and if they get in trouble or if they have some issues, you can always communicate with them and change it and do what you want, but they fly themselves. So, yeah.
Didn't the Iranians capture one of these that landed in their territory, and they have it now?
I really can't. I would say they don't have any Northrop aircraft. I'll say that. I know that for a fact, but they may. I can't comment on it really. Yeah.
Was the refueling boom or drogue or both?
It's a drogue at this point. They're using drogues. That's what they did just recently. But they can do a boom as well. They can just put the airplane. They can use essentially all the characteristics that they have for air-to-air refueling now, and just put it right behind the airplane where you want it, and then the boom manager will do it. We're doing an unmanned, which is a Global Hawk to Global Hawk, which will be where it's all unmanned. I mean, where you don't have anybody involved in it. You just tell them to go to the right place. Yeah.
Yeah, I fly through military operation areas a lot, and you know, they're huge areas in Alaska and usually low level, and I just wonder, what do they have for collision avoidance? Do they know that we're there?
There is, I don't know all the details, but they probably do not have collision avoidance. They could have a TCAS on board, and if it did, you could automatically put it to stay away from other aircraft.
It's uncontrolled airspace, and it's like, you just kind of wonder.
There are issues of unmanned aircraft and manned aircraft, all the time. And there's lots of problems happening right now with people that have these little small things that are, the little drones that they're flying around that are starting to fly around airports. And those are serious issues. And there's a lot of talk about what kind of control we're going to have for aircraft in the future. I think this is all very easily handled, but we just have to do it. But the answer is, I don't know. Certainly on this aircraft, there is none. And on Global Hawk, there are none, but that I know of. But you could put it on. Sorry, yes.
Are you going to weaponize, or are we going to weaponize that aircraft? Or
Yes.
is that just surveillance?
Yes.
Unlike Fire Scout, which is already.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And to counterance, this is a general defense question. This is a third technology on one hand, and then the brutality of these Middle East forces that are medieval in their attack procedures or Ukraine gaining territory. How do these two come together?
Did anybody hear that? The question was, how does the technology like this and the brutality of the what's happening in the Middle East and ISIS come together? I don't really know. I can't really say they do. We certainly can use, they are using unmanned systems now against that force, and there's great concern about it. I mean, there's this issue of drones being used to kill people, and we do it every day, and there's a lot of concern about that. I mean, that's a very different thing than we used to do, but we're doing it. Now, these are all approved and they're manned, and they essentially, they are manned. These are aircraft that are manned by pilots back home, and they get approval to, they see an enemy and they ask for permission and what they're doing. If they get permission, they push the button, and so, I mean, it's inside of a system that includes humans. But the technology is here to do that, and you know, it'll be used or not based on what the forces want to do. I'm the wrong one to ask. All I know is that the capabilities exist. Yeah.
Agree about the new ultra high frequency radars that can defeat stealth airplanes would have to be. What can you comment on that? I really can't. I can only say that every measure has a countermeasure, and every countermeasure has a countermeasure. And it's a game that gets played continuously. And if people believe they have a way to see stealth aircraft, I think there's probably a way for the stealth aircraft for them not to see them. And nobody talks about it until we get into a game, and we'll see what happens. So the measure-countermeasure game is just a continuous thing that goes on. Yes, you can, if you think about a stealth aircraft, the B-2 bomber flies over and you see it. You know, I mean, you really do. And you can, but it depends on where and what ranges and et cetera, et cetera. So, one follow-up. How does China fit in relative to that?
okay, question is, how does China fit into this? China, many countries are building stealthy aircraft, and we work very hard to try to determine how good they are. Obviously, if we can do something, somebody else can do it. Most likely, you know, our securities on many things have been compromised. We believe that people know a lot about things. Probably there's nothing you can do about that. I mean, people work very hard at getting secrets, and they do have some capable systems, and they're getting better, and they will continue to get better. And we just have to be better. We just have to do things in a better way, and we have an amazing capability in this country to do phenomenal things. And you know, I'm delighted. I know some things that we're doing now that blow my socks off, and you know, hopefully they're ahead of what other people are doing. But you know, you never know. You never know. There were some other questions in the back. Yes.
Yeah, sir, do you anticipate any future conversion of both military and/or civilian aircraft to a totally unmanned mode?
Do I envision that? I can say that you can do that. There are such conversions that have already been done. It's rather straightforward to do. There are people that are doing that for various missions, but it's complicated because you don't get all the functionality if you just start with an airplane that has. You can fly it, you can take it off, you can do a lot of things, but there's a lot of the systems of understanding its health that you probably don't have all the information about. So it's not as good as if you started from the beginning. I think if we go to systems for a new variation will go on. There are, let me say that the next generation bomber, that's a contract which is being looked at right now, will be awarded sometime this year to one of the two teams that are competing. Is both, it's designed to be manned or unmanned. In other words, it can go either way. And then once that's the case, all the capabilities to run it unmanned or manned will be in it. But if you start with only a manned airplane and try to make it unmanned, it's probably not going to have all the capability. I'm sorry, there was, yes?
Yeah, with the advent of these data links from the ground up, that's an opportunity for cyber warfare.
Absolutely. Yep. There's measures and there's countermeasures. Yes, there are, absolutely. And you have to work at that, but there's certainly opportunities for that. Yep.
Would you predict that a commercial carrier like Boeing or Airbus will come out with a pilotless version in the near future?
The question was, well, do you think that the major airplane makers will come out with a piloted version of a commercial airliner in the future? The answer is they could do it today. Boeing is competing on the bomber, and it's an unmanned bomber, and it's no different than what they would do for the other, for a manned. So they could do it. The question is when you buy it, and the issue is how do we get to the point in the world where that happens? It's not clear to me how fast that's going to happen. I think it's going to be slow because there is this great reluctance to fly an unmanned airplane. I got to tell you. I mean, how do you feel? If you just were saying, you guys want to go on an unmanned airplane? Maybe probably all you pilots would love to do that. So much easier.
Ask the folks on that German air flight.
Yeah. Well, that's right. But there are. Well, I mean, the real issue is the trade. If you think about what people are worried about, they're worried about safety, and they're worried about, is something going to break? And if it breaks, what's it going to do to me? And we now feel very comfortable about being in unmanned elevators because the elevators don't break, and we don't feel that there's a big problem with runaway rail cars and trains. So we're comfortable in that. We have to be very comfortable when nothing breaks in the airplanes, and the records now in modern airplanes are getting awfully good. That where unfortunately the majority of crashes are pilot-induced and not machine. And they don't like to talk about that, but mostly you find that that's the case. So if you didn't have a pilot in there, you'd probably have a safer overall system today. And I don't mean that everyone wants to laugh. No, it's a problem because you think about training. I mean, how much it requires to train a pilot to keep them constantly up to speed, and all the things can happen if they drank or if they're tired or all those little things that happen in a very stressful situation in an airplane. The unmanned system doesn't have that problem, and its learning is fully up to speed with the latest upload of the software. As you know, I mean, if there's a problem with something and they find it in a crash, they fix it once and it's done. If you have to do that with a pilot, you have to train all the pilots and you have to keep them knowledgeable of that new mode of failure that has to be in their minds at all times for all of their training. And so there is a safety system where the unmanned system, as long as the system itself, the airplane itself won't break, is safer if it's unmanned. Yeah.
You mentioned the facet and then the UCAV B2 technology. Is there using your elevator speech, is there another step in stealth coming? Different technology?
There are some things that are, yes. I guess there's better capability. The biggest concern, biggest problems we've had, which are really hard to solve, is for infrared detection. And that's being worked. Yeah.
Well, if you stop to think about Google sending a car from California to the East Coast, that's immensely more complicated.
Yes, much more complicated than flying an airplane, absolutely. Yes. I agree, and it can be done. The problem, and the biggest problem, is the urban problem in cars where somebody walks out in front of the car and you have to be able to do that. That's not a normal problem in an aircraft. The aircraft is not that hard, but it's emotionally very difficult for people to get there. But I think they will, yeah.
Possibility there that unmanned aircraft can see and avoid a flock of birds.
Well, you could certainly design the sensor that would see the birds and most likely be able to avoid them. Yes. I don't know if that system's aboard. I don't know. I don't think so. No, I don't think so. Yeah. Not yet, but I could envision doing it easily. It's just another sensor. A little more money. Yeah.
What advice would you give a young 18-year-old that wants to be a pilot or a drone pilot? Which avenue would you advise?
Well, I think if they really want to be one, I'd say, well, you'll be like your friends who fly balloons. People love to fly balloons because it's fun, but it's not going to be a business. The business side is going to get harder because we will do it unmanned. And by the way, there's I don't know when that's going to happen. There may be another generation. It's very, very difficult to make this transition, but I think it's coming. And the reason I wanted to tell all you guys is because you're all pilots. You've all been through this, and it's hard to think about this new world, or maybe you do, but it's a transition which will mean that there will not be a lot of groups like this in 50 years.
Yeah. Going back to the consolidation of the defense industry, do you see any more consolidation now that the companies are so very large? And then can you talk, the second part, can you talk about the ones that didn't happen for Northrop Grumman?
Okay, well, the first part, yes, I think there will be more consolidation, but the Defense Department has told the major aerospace companies that they're not going to allow any more primes to integrate. So there won't be another major integration. But will they allow other small companies to be acquired or other groups of companies to acquire and grow? Yes, the answer is yes. So there will constantly be small companies added to big companies, but there will not be big mergers. And speaking of the big merger that didn't happen, that was the Northrop Grumman Lockheed Martin merger that didn't happen, and that was essentially where from my perspective, I was running Northrop Grumman and very happy in what we were doing, but there is this situation, you do deal with shareholder value, and Lockheed Martin came and wanted to acquire us. They liked what we had done. They liked the vision we had and the things that we had acquired and how we were putting it together, and they offered us a substantial premium to acquire the company, and I said no several times. And next to the last time, my investment banker said, I can't give you a fairness opinion in the future that your plan is better than the price. You're right at the barrier, right at the line. I'm having a hard time, I'm gasping to say that my fairness opinion says that you are better off being independent than being sold, because the issue is what's the value. If somebody gives you enough money and you look at your plan of what you can grow and what your total value of the company is going to be over the next decade, if that doesn't equal the amount someone's willing to pay you today, then you've got to sell, or you're ready to get sued by the shareholders, which is not a happy thing to happen here. So I took that with a jolt, and I got in 2 weeks. They gave us a higher offer. So we agreed to sell to Lockheed Martin, and we spent a year as it was being looked at by the Justice Department about the merger, and we spent the whole time putting the whole company together and how it's going to be formed and what's going to go with what. And in the 11th hour, they called us in and said, we're not going to allow it. We decided we really don't want it. You guys would be too capable, you'd hurt the industry. And so the answer is no. So they were the groom and we were the bride. It was really a tough day for me, I'll tell you that. It was not a good situation because all of my people were leaving and you know, they all had other plans and we had to step back and big gasp. We dug out our old book, which was you know, how we wanted to see the company go forward and continue doing it. And it turned out that we continued to do it. We acquired 3 or 4 or 5 big companies since then. After that failed, and were able to recover. But it was not a happy day. I didn't have a good week.
What year was that?
It was 1990. Yeah.
Don't you think we're a lot closer to flying cross country without a pilot? We go aboard planes now, we never see them. We get recorded messages about the landing time and video and what have you. It seems that we're being conditioned now to be in that state.
Well, I would say that the onboard the aircraft today, or modern aircraft, they have all the capability to take off and land and fly completely automated. And most of the time, they're doing that. I mean, they're on autopilot the whole time. I don't know how much. I haven't talked to many, but most of them tell me they like to take off, and then they put it on autopilot, and then they have coffee, and then they get back at it again when they're about to land. And a lot of them like to land. I mean, they still will take it in, but on a bad day, they generally let it auto land. You know, if it's lousy, miserable, foggy, and they're going in, I mean, well, the unmanned systems don't care about the weather. That's a nice thing. Yeah. Yeah.
And today's modern airliners, are there any of them that could be controlled from the ground if need be?
I don't know. They could be. I guess I really don't know. That would be what's built into their systems, whether or not the owner of the airlines have demanded that. Certainly it could be, but I don't know. Yes.
Yeah, I have a question about, can you comment on any shielding your aircraft would have to survive in an electronic RF environment? For example, there are EMP weapon systems, there are weapon systems designed to take out avionics.
Yep.
We fly them, everybody else flies them. How would your aircraft operate in that environment?
Most of them will be in very serious trouble. The EMP problem is a real problem, and most people have not will not pay the bill for the kind of not only just shielding, but that you actually have to build your chips out of different materials, and it's a much more expensive game. There are some things that are done that way, but there are a lot. The majority are not. So. Unfortunately, if you're flying in something and hit by an EMP weapon, you're probably just going to die right there, the whole thing. And whether you're manned or unmanned, it doesn't matter. You're just a lump in the sky. Yeah.
In 30 years from now, you think there'll be airspace available for general aviation flying?
I think there'll always be room. I think there'll be a demand for people that will love to fly, that want to fly. There'll be an ability to have general aviation. They'll probably, I don't know quite how they'll be set, but we'll probably, I'm sure there'll always be general aviation capability. I don't see that ever go away. There may be some more controls that are put on things. There certainly will be controls of where unmanned things are going to have to fly. But unmanned things really don't care that they're flying. So they'll put them in corridors in a much different way. Yeah. Yes.
I'm having a hard time visualizing, I guess it's possible, the Thunderbird and Blue Angels.
Well, there is that issue of the unmanned versus manned, and we're facing that in all exploration. The major exploration of space is all done unmanned. I mean, everything, things in Mars and where we see all the planets. But the romance is about the guy going up into space and flying in something. It's getting harder and harder and more expensive to do that, and people are constantly questioning, well, why are we doing it? And you know, it's like the Thunderbirds. Well, you know, maybe we'll always have to have Thunderbirds because it's a way of giving some vision to our children about the excitement of the next generation, even though we won't do it that way. And that's essentially the way it is with astronauts. I mean, there was a period where man was important. Going to the moon we didn't have the capability to do it unmanned, but they did. We just did today. We do it completely unmanned, so there'll always be that bid, and I don't know how to deal with that exactly. I do think that our kids are helping in this process because they don't even talk around the table anymore. They do it by electronic. So you know, once the whole society doesn't care about ever going anywhere, and all they want to do is get it on their PDA and deal with it, then you know we're there. They're there because they want to see the world through their little screen, and the world can do that. Yeah.
Going back in history, Northrop was great in the flying wing design. Was the B-2, did it use the flying wing design because of stealth or because the flying wing was a design that was needed?
It was used because it was the most efficient way to carry a payload. You could do it with the stealth, the physics of stealth design allowed you to do it. You didn't have to do it, but it allowed you to do it, and it was the most efficient way to build the airplane. And all the stability problems that were around when the first flying wings were put together were trivially handled electronically. So it was an ideal marriage between the mission and what you could do. Yeah.
What do they do with the emergency requirements in the event of a failure or something mechanically?
Of what, an unmanned system?
Yes.
If there is a failure of some sort, that it will attempt to land. If it detects that there's a failure, it will go into a mode to land, and it's constantly updating where it can land and what it can do. It would go do it if it can. Now, it may not, the failure may be such that it crashes, just as any failure doesn't allow you to get where you want to get, but it has the capability to do it. It's interesting, and I know, I just used this, maybe you read this, but you know the plane that was in LaGuardia that landed in the river, you know, the pilot did a fantastic job, and for everybody on board, thank God he was a glider pilot, because most pilots would never have made it, wouldn't have been able to make that landing. But the more important thing to realize, to me anyway, thinking about unmanned, is that the time it took for the crew to decide that there was a problem, had that been unmanned, it would have known there was a problem, it would have landed and had plenty of time to do it. So if it were an unmanned airplane, it would have been back on the ground. And it wouldn't have had that heroics. I mean, the guy saved everybody's life, but the delay in making the decisions that what was happening, what was wrong, the system knew what was wrong. I mean, it knew that the engines were bad, it knew all the right things, but it took the crew time to figure it out. By the time you figured it out, you had no option to go back. But there was like a minute that airplane would have been back on the ground. If that was an unmanned system, it would have been back on the ground. It knew it was in trouble. Yeah.
Well, the other threat, though, is with our satellite systems. If there's a failure of that or destruction or something, then the whole systems are going to be non-operating.
Yes, there are failures. If there's a failure of a manned system or unmanned system, the answers are they can die. And if we have a satellite and there's a failure in the satellite, sometimes they can get them back, and sometimes they can't. And that happens with airplanes. You know, it depends on the failure. I think the question is, you know, can the human do things that will right the wrong of whatever the thing's wrong when they're there? The answer is maybe. Under certain circumstances they can, under certain circumstances they can't. The question is, the more we can make the systems not fail, not have trivial failures. Big failures, you know, will probably take out whoever, if it's manned or unmanned. But, and that's what we're working on, and over time we'll get better and better, and it will get that way. And that's essentially, that's the story of the elevator. The elevator now, the systems are sufficiently good that nobody worries about getting an unmanned elevator. They just don't. I don't know of anybody that worries about it. And because the systems are very robust. And we have to get there. And over time, you know, we will, I think. Yeah?
How does an unmanned vehicle that's declared itself an emergency and is finding a runway to land at clear the manned vehicles for its approach and landing?
In the United States, I'm not sure. I'm sure there are ways of doing it. I know overseas, because I've been involved, I've had some of our systems that have had a problem and have gone landed. And they've generally not, they've not gotten permission to do it, they've just landed. But in the US, that would require, on the way to that landing, bringing in a pilot. Anytime we're in manned airspace, there's a pilot around, and the system will contact that pilot if there's a problem. And the pilot will then take over the responsibility and do whatever he has to do. Essentially, like he's on board, he'll communicate with whoever, do whatever he's doing. And if he was told at that point that he couldn't land there, he couldn't go there, he couldn't be on the path that he's on, the pilot would do whatever he had. The man would have to listen to whoever the controller is and do whatever he did, including let it crash. But there is a way of immediately coupling in. There is a hope, or there's a mode in some of the autopilots going into private airplanes that is an automatic come home mode. It's called the widow's mode. It's when you're flying with your husband and he has a heart attack and you don't know what to do. You push the button and you go home. And it's not a bad idea to have in a private airplane. But you know, it'll take you back to an airport and land it. Boy, that stopped everybody. Well, yes.
Did you guys study any of the German flying wing technology from World War II?
Say that again?
Did you study any of the German flying wing technology from World War II, like the Hortons?
Yeah, no, I didn't. I mean, I didn't. I'm not a detailed analyst in that, but you know, great technology, and so it wasn't just John Northrop that thought about it. I mean, the technology was around. I don't know if how much he used that when he was doing his B-47 work, but you know, it was one of the interesting things. I just speaking of John Northrop, he was still alive when the B-2 was being built, and he was quite old and he was quite ill, and there was a feeling that he was not going to live very long. And about 4 months before he died, the Air Force agreed to allow John Northrop to get briefed into the program for the day and to hear it. And he was blown away, and he spent hours asking technical questions on every conceivable thing, the engines, and wait, this and that and the other. And at the end of the whole thing, he had tears in his eyes and said, "Now I know why God let me live so long." Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the James Webb Telescope, which is Northrop Grumman's developing?
Well, let's see. In what sense? What it can do, or?
When you mentioned the fact that once it's launched, there's no recovery, and it's broke like the Hubble was. There's no fixing.
No. We could actually, if there was something that you know, you can go up. It will be in an orbit that one could go up, and man could go up and do something if they wanted to. But in general, we put satellites up that once they're there, they, you know, they're there for, they're not to be fixed. And but the web is, you know, it's going to be an order of magnitude better than the telescope today. But it's also very expensive. I don't know all the technical details. I haven't kept up with it, but it's close to being finished. I don't know exactly when the launch is. It's in the next few years. But so I can't really. I'm not up with it.
Well, one of the fascinating things, I got a briefing on it while I was at the Paris Air Show from one of the guys who was developing it. He said that we'll almost be able to see back at the beginning of time of the creation of the universe, which I think is pretty outstanding.
Yeah. There's another interesting thing that's being developed with the web and that is we're going to be using it to look for other planets, for exoplanets, and what they're designing is a screen, a big sun blocker, which is about 30 kilometers away from the web, and it's controlled so that it can be put directly on a star so that you can block out the light of the star and look for the light of the planets around it. And just think of this screen, and then and that gets managed with. So if you want to look at a particular star, you have to move the star shade, which is 30 kilometers away, exactly in line with it, and look through it. And all that gets managed with controller. Yeah.
Does the controller see the airport? The airport we're flying, and the controller is showing the airplane where to go.
Well,
see the runway?
No. No, it's all, he just knows the location and he knows the characteristics of what the glide path needs to be, he knows all the characteristics of the airplane, and he essentially puts it on a GPS path all the way down and lands it. So you don't have to see it at all. I mean, there's no visual requirements at all. It's just geometry. It knows where you are, where it is, and where the airport is, and where the runway is, and where the glide path is, and it just keeps it there. Okay, thank you very much.